Yeah. Hello. I feel like a bit of an imposter because I'm not a mathematician at all. I'm actually from a group who are famously bad at maths and computing, and that is practical organic chemistry. So I want to start off by saying I do not necessarily understand all of the computing stuff that goes behind AI, and I know nothing about maths. What I am concerned about is how kind of current school pupils who are growing up in the environment that we're in becoming our students and how we interact with them, the world that our students are going into when they graduate, and basically this talk is to persuade you that I think we really, really need to teach students about ethics, and that everyone should think extremely carefully before. So I also want to say that I'm specifically talking about like popular, easily accessible LLMs like ChatGPT, Grok, Gemini, etc. And I guess I want to start this talk also with a little bit of a trigger warning that there will be mentions of murder, suicide, discrimination against pretty much every marginalised group, climate catastrophe, and child abuse. So these will all be mentioned in this talk. The title of this talk used to be Being a Fun Sponge, but I decided to make it a little bit more professional. So yeah, that hopefully gives you the vibe of the talk. So ethics, we aim to teach our students ethics, and in certain, I assume that every department already does. So in chemistry we have an academic integrity module as part of their chemical skills module. And we have various guidance from UCL centrally about what are the qualities of a UCL graduate. There's been a lot of media and a lot of literature about many serious ethical concerns with AI use. And currently, at least in chemistry, but I think in most departments, we have guidance on like how can it be used in assessment, category 1, category 2, category 3. But we don't actually teach our students about the ethics around using it, apart from to make vague allusions to that it might be bad for the environment or something like that. So I'm basically going to go through some of the downsides that I see with AI use from an ethics standpoint and how that feeds into our student body. I also have a strong passion for like the pastoral care of students. I do that a lot with the second years. I'm like the second year lead tutor. So that's like where I'm coming from on this. So this is from a UCL document about what the graduate skills, attributes and knowledge should be for all of our graduates. And the things that are going to come up, problem solving and decision making, analytical and critical thinking, creativity, resilience and drive, ethics and sustainability. Obviously ethics and sustainability are huge, and the rest of it comes into quite a lot how our students use AI. So let's start with the first concern. UCL is quite keen on Athena Swan. I assume most universities are. AI has been shown quite a lot to perpetuate social biases as a result of its training data, brackets, the internet. There are lots of unpleasant people on the internet, and there are stereotypes become stereotypes because a lot of people believe them and a lot of people put information out about that. So there have been quite a few published examples. So someone from LSE did a study that showed that AI generates negative performance reviews for people with like stereotypically female names compared to male names when the same data is input. So all the exact same data about how someone's doing in their job, but the performance reviews were more negative for the female names. There have been published examples of AI being deciding who gets mortgages, which involve denying mortgages for people of colour, specifically in like white neighbourhoods. Racial profiling for law enforcement is an area that AI is being used quite a lot in, which is really, really, really concerning, and obviously perpetuating stereotypes of marginalised groups. And medical, legal and social mistreatment of neurodivergent and trans people. There was quite a really interesting study about this, although quite concerning, about how AI use in medical care spaces can result in poor treatment for these marginalised groups. So this is something that exists out there in the world, and this is the world that is the context for our students. So I just wanted to give you this 1979 IBM training manual. A computer can never be held accountable, therefore a computer must never make a management decision. And something that really concerns me is people using AI quickly in stuff like hiring, recruiting, anything to do with HR, performance management, things like that. I think this is a really important principle that we need to keep in mind. So, I see a lot of AI-generated images all the time, and I'm personally concerned because I think a lot of people don't know about the human cost of AI-generated images. Aside from what data it's being trained on, which I'll come back to later, there's a thing called AI sweatshops. So if you're a country with cheap exploitable labour in the global south, these corporations, these American AI companies can come in and set up these AI sweatshops. So what happens is they want to make sure that their AIs are not producing violent images. But AI needs to know what a violent image is. So these workers, and it's very common in Kenya, have to go through and tag images of like car crash victims, murder victims, rape victims, things like that. And not only is it exploitative of those workers, these workers are not getting any protections. You can imagine, for example, in cybercrime units in the UK, there's all kinds of mental health support, job support, hazard pay, things like that. This is not something that exists in the countries where these people are getting exploited. So every time anyone types into ChatGPT, give me a nice picture of a red car, that has been trained on someone who's been out there making sure that no violent images are getting served up to you. So that's something that I don't think we should be implicitly supporting, obviously. So obviously sustainability is a huge issue, and the first thing is the minerals that go into the technology that these data centers require. So we know, especially from like the news articles around smartphones and stuff like that, that copper and cobalt mining have been leading to all kinds of human rights abuses in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Deep sea mining is becoming increasingly a thing, and it's causing really serious damage to marine ecosystems. And the third point I think is particularly important for us at UCL. I don't know about maths, but I suspect it's similar. In a recent year group, we have 60% students from China in chemistry. And if we are setting assessments being like, hey, use ChatGPT to do this, when ChatGPT is a company that is kind of exploiting and polluting their homeland, I don't think it's as simple as straightforward of just being like, oh, we have to roll with it, because it's not polluting our homelands. It's, well, making generalizations, you know, we're an international discipline, but most of us live in the UK. It's polluting the homelands of our students, and a lot of our students do go back and get jobs in China, so it's quite concerning that this is happening. UCL really likes to put forward that it is sustainability driven. We have sustainability awards, we all have sustainable research projects, especially in chemistry, it's a huge thing. And we expect our graduates to be sustainability driven. It was on the graduates attributes list. So we need to act in alignment with our own sustainability goals. So I put AI in italics there. It's not just, there's data centers and then there's new data centers that are being built for AI. And AI data centers alone use over 1% of the entire world's energy. For most of us, we are older than our students, and the students are inheriting the world that we live in. So we should be concerned about climate change. I don't think that's a controversial thing to say, I hope. But it's our students that are inheriting the world, and what are we teaching them? That it's because we can't police, or because AI can do something better than maybe we can, it's okay that we're doing this. Like, I'm a millennial who doom scrolls a lot, so I'm really concerned about climate change. But yeah, over 1% of the entire world's energy is now more than Bitcoin. It's quite concerning. So there's all of these statistics by all of these researchers and think tanks. You hear article titles all the time about how people are being forced out of their homes, people have no clean drinking water, pollution, things like that. Like, just a handful of it is what I'm presenting, but it's actually quite worrying the amount of data that's coming out about this. So by 2028, AI is expected to represent about 19% of the total power demand by data centers. I think it has gone up since then. That statistic was a statistic that I found last year when I first gave this talk, so it might well have increased since then. So I just want to whiz through a selection of headlines that I found recently. So Lake Tahoe in the US, that town that has 50,000 people, all of their energy source was then used for a AI data center, and the residents were told you need to find somewhere new to get energy from because our grid cannot cope with the increased demand from the data center. Georgia, Georgia the state, not Georgia the country. AI data center in Georgia, and this is in the US, a developed, in inverted commas, country where you would think that AI companies would have a little bit more inhibitions about being publicly terrible for the environment compared to the exploitation that they do in the global south, but 30 million gallons of water without paying for it. So local residents were unable to get water, and 30 million gallons is like an F-ton of water. So new data centres in Ireland now consume more than a fifth of Irish national electricity. That is a huge amount. And again, just thinking about the implications for this climate change, 20 years' time, our students are out there in the world, like, we need to think carefully about what we're encouraging them to do and how it's contributing towards climate change. This recently went viral. It's AOC, who's a congresswoman in the US, and she took samples of drinking water from places that have recently had data centers and presented them. So here's a picture of her holding up drinking water from, it seems so a lot of them seem to be being built in Georgia at the moment, which is why this is also from Georgia. But yeah, so Meta constructed a data center, and that's a sample of the drinking water that came out of people's taps. As you can see, it's brown. And then OpenAI is predicted to use as much power as New York City and San Diego combined, and those are not, you know, energy light cities. So this is something that I find incredibly concerning, and I hope you do too. So moving on from sustainability, but again, I want to tie this back to UCL graduate attributes. We are expecting to produce graduates that care about sustainability. But when we educate them about AI and when we give our ethics modules, no one is talking about this, or at least not in my department. I can't speak for your departments. So plagiarism, we've had some talk about academic misconduct. And again, I don't want to dictate what that looks like for maths because I have no idea about maths at all. And I do approach things from a more pastoral side, but I want to give some general points about plagiarism. So if a student took the content of an article and paraphrased it using their ideas and arguments, this would be considered plagiarism, and I don't think that's controversial. Authors of articles that were published online have not given their consent for AI to be trained on their data. It's impossible. And a few years ago, it would be impossible to predict that anything that you wrote and published would be used to train an AI. When AI answers questions, it does not tell you whose ideas are being used. So it's incapable of crediting its sources in a lot of cases, and it's being trained on copyrighted material. And I don't know if our students are fully aware of this because I've never heard anyone talking about it. I think it's probably our duty to make this clear. But if we are giving them academic integrity training on the one hand, and then telling them to use LLMs on the other hand, is this undermining what we're actually telling them about plagiarism as a concept? This also applies to images. So AI is being trained on people's likenesses, their artwork, their photos, their design, their ideas. It's often copyrighted. And artists are being stolen from. But I have particular concern about AI being trained on people's likenesses, which again we'll get more into later. But if you've ever used AI to generate a picture of like some students looking at a teacher or something that seems innocuous, have you ever thought about like whose face was used to train it to generate that image? And how do you feel about that? So I think policy and stuff hasn't caught up, and I'm not saying I have all the answers at all, because I really don't. But AI is being promoted by institutions and capital, but I think it's still plagiarism. I don't know if anyone remembers the case in I think it was the late 90s, with Metallica suing teenagers for burning CDs for Metallica, which was quite a huge thing at the time, and that was because the record industry was the capital, but now AI is the capital. People have completely reversed their thinking on what constitutes stealing, which I think is quite interesting. A couple of memes, because I'm a millennial. So this is from spellingmistakescostlives.com. It's a very good website, and they do kind of satirical images based on existing stuff. So here's one from their parody of the UK government. It's not theft if you say you're using it to train your AI algorithm. The second picture is an Instagram post from the author, Vivian Drake, who found that her books were being used to train AI, and then books under her name were being published on Amazon, and it was complete AI slop. It's a very interesting thread because she goes through talking about how she felt about this and how she felt violated by it. And when she made a post about this on X, formerly known as Twitter, apparently a lot of people then just used her profile picture to make offensive images of her and replied to her about that when she was posting about how violated she felt by her work being stolen. So you can imagine how quickly this gets extremely concerning. I won't go into it too much because people have already talked about it a lot, but studies do show that critical thinking is impaired by high levels of AI usage, and they also show that young people are primarily affected because they're still developing the way they think and they're growing up in an environment where there is AI. So this is a really interesting article from Time magazine, and this is a quote from a student in a high school, and it's a really good quote, but at the end the student says, because of AI, my generation knows how to perform but not learn. So many of my friends sat in the same boat, being unable to explain things in discussions. One had to openly admit he couldn't summarize part of the book we read because AI wrote his analysis. This comes into more academic studies about cognitive offloading. So a study which I have linked there showed that higher AI usage is strongly associated with lower critical thinking abilities, using a standard. Basically what they did was they got people to rate how often they used AI and then gave them a standard critical thinking test and found quite a strong correlation from 669 people. And there was another study that went viral from MIT on Archive, which basically showed that even people who just use Google searches, when you used to be able to turn AI off Google, you can't anymore. People who just use Google searches could recall what they'd written in an essay, but people who used AI couldn't. I'm getting towards the end, I promise. So critical thinking databases can be changed by companies that own the technology, and people can flood the internet with information that they want people to be served by AI. So what these companies do is they normalize the use of their AI at a financial loss. People become dependent on it, and then it can serve you propaganda. This is something that was investigated by The Telegraph, basically saying that superpowers and governments are exploiting AI systems by poisoning the data, so flooding the internet with positive propaganda about their regime, etc., etc. There's been headlines about ChatGPT signing deals with questionable moral governments, so to kind of support their propaganda of their regimes. Like, it sounds kind of scary, but this is like literally happening. So if students are kind of going into the world feeling lonely, talking to their chatbot about what's going on in the world, the chatbot could then be talking propaganda at them. So it sounds kind of like, oh, well, this isn't what we're using AI for, but it could be what our students are using AI for, and increasingly it is what our students are using AI for. So it's important that we're aware of this and that they're aware of this, which is why we need to teach it. I'm going to just whiz through these last two slides about this really quickly, but I mentioned it earlier, women and young people are being affected by abusive images of them being generated by AI online. You see these headlines all the time, AI encouraging someone to die by suicide, AI encouraging someone to commit murder, etc. Because fake, realistic-looking images are easier to make than ever. So, a recent case, there was Tumbler Ridge School in Canada, had a school shooting. It killed 5 children, aged between 12 and 13, and a teacher. And their parents are now suing the OpenAI because the shooter had been using ChatGPT to talk about the shooting prior to it happening. The Center for the Control of Digital Harm did a study where they posed as potential school shooters and people who were contemplating acts of violence, found that basically AI still encouraged them to do it. So this was published in March 2026, so it is quite recent. ChatGPT gave a researcher posing as a 13-year-old interested in school violence maps of a high school campus. Gemini, meanwhile, told a user discussing a synagogue attack that metal shrapnel is typically more lethal. So this is a real harm that is being done, like, in society. And again, this is the society that our students are growing up in. You may have seen in the news a recent case where a school posted a picture of a winning sports team online, and then they were used by digital criminals to make child sexual abuse images of those children, and the school was blackmailed with them. Again, it seems like it won't affect us, but our future students are growing up in this environment. These pupils could still soon be our students. And if we're not thinking about the kind of context and the information that they're getting around AI, and we're not educating them on ethics, then we're not really acknowledging this context. Final thing. So a lot of these have been covered already, especially in the keynote speech, which I thought was excellent. So if we encourage AI use without educating on the ethics, we're obfuscating the ethics. It's not a passive thing to not educate about ethics. It's an active choice to not educate about ethics. If we want to embrace new technology, so it's to not look like we're behind or because technology can do our own disciplines better than we can in a lot of cases, we have a responsibility to consider all the implications and act like a university about it. What are the consequences to the values of our degree? Are we incentivizing AI use beyond what is ethical with the way that we are presenting workloads and how things are being marked? Are we taking ownership of the impacts of our own AI use and being transparent with students about it? And I see AI-generated abstract slides, images at conferences all the time, and I want to ask everyone, is this reflective of our own values? Sorry, I think I might have overrun, but thank you for listening. And I want to ask you finally, would you tick all these disclaimer boxes in order to use your AI? Yes, sorry.